All right, let's dive into a huge question, one that really gets to the heart of how our world works today. In an age where everything feels so connected, what's happening to the very idea of a country? We're going to explore this epic tug-of-war between globalization and the power of the nation-state.
So, let's just put the big provocative question right out there from the start. Are countries, as we've known them for centuries, becoming obsolete? I mean, think about it. When money, ideas, and even global problems like a pandemic can just zap across borders in an instant, you got to start wondering, right? Do those lines we drew on the map still mean what they used to?
To really get what's going on, we kind of have to update our mental picture of what a border even is. For centuries, the old reality was pretty simple. Borders were like walls, physical checkpoints, passport stamps, nice clear lines that told you who was in charge. But the new reality, it's a whole different ballgame. Today, it's much better to think of borders as networks. The really important connections aren't roads or fences. They're the thousands of miles of undersea data cables, the incredibly complex global supply chains, and the invisible, constant flow of information.
And all of this has led to what's famously been called the flat world. It's this powerful idea that we're now in an era where goods, ideas, and money can just zip across the planet with a speed and freedom that's just breathtaking. This flattening is really the engine of globalization, and believe me, it is changing all the old rules.
But, okay, before we can really dig into how the game is changing, we have to understand the original rules. And that all starts with the foundational concept that's at stake here: national sovereignty. This is, you could say, the traditional rulebook for how the world is supposed to work.
And the absolute foundation of that rulebook is this thing called Westphalian sovereignty. Now, this goes way back to 1648, and it's built on a really simple but powerful idea. A state, a country, is the absolute boss within its own borders, period. It has total, exclusive authority over its land and its people, and other countries, well, they need to stay out of its business. For hundreds of years, this was the bedrock of how nations dealt with each other.
But of course, nothing stays simple forever, right? The idea of this pure, untouched sovereignty has definitely evolved. After the chaos of World War II, you see the creation of huge institutions like the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, and they all introduced a new layer of global rules and cooperation. And that brings us to today, a world of deep, deep interdependence, where a country's own interests are completely tangled up with its global responsibility.
So, if that's the old model, how exactly is globalization putting it to the test? Well, the game is being fundamentally changed, and the pressure is coming from three major directions at once.
The pressure on the old idea of national sovereignty really comes from three main places. First, you've got the relentless force of economic integration. Second, there's the rise of political cooperation, where nations find they have to team up. And third, you have the unstoppable 24/7 flow of culture and technology right across those borders we were just talking about.
Okay, let's start with the economy, because this is such a classic trade-off. On one hand, opening up to the world can fuel massive economic growth, bring in new technology, and make things more efficient. But it also creates some serious challenges to your sovereignty. Governments might feel pressured to get into a race to the bottom, cutting regulations or taxes just to attract companies. And as we all saw back in 2008, being plugged into the global financial system means a crisis on the other side of the planet can absolutely wreck your economy at home. It's the unavoidable trade-off. More global connection often means less national control.
Now, for the political challenge, you really don't have to look any further than the European Union. It is the ultimate example of something political scientists call pooled sovereignty. It's this fascinating idea where member countries voluntarily give up some of their individual power. They agree to follow common rules on all sorts of things in order to gain the collective strength and the economic clout of being part of a much, much bigger team. It's a deliberate choice. Trade a little bit of your own autonomy for a lot more shared influence.
And finally, there's the technology paradox. The promise is just incredible, right? Instant global communication, access to basically all of human knowledge in your pocket. But there's a real danger here, too. Some thinkers have a pretty stark name for it: digital colonialism. This is where a country's entire digital infrastructure, we're talking social media, cloud computing, everything, is owned and run by giant tech companies from another country. And this raises some urgent questions. Who actually controls all that data? Who's doing the surveillance? And who's really in charge of the information flowing inside a nation's own border? So, you can imagine, with all these forces squeezing the traditional nation-state, you're going to get a reaction. And that brings us to what you might call the great pushback. Because believe me, not everyone is on board with this vision of a borderless world.
The debate over globalization gets really fierce, and you can see why. There are compelling points on both sides.
On one hand, proponents will tell you it's the engine of growth and innovation, it fosters cooperation, and helps spread positive values. But critics have a powerful counterargument. They'll say it makes inequality worse, it erodes local culture and identity, and it can create that race to the bottom for labor rights and environmental rules. Both sides have a point, and the reality is probably somewhere in the messy middle.
And listen, this isn't just some abstract debate for stuffy classrooms. The resurgence of nationalist populism that we've seen all around the globe is a direct political consequence of this exact tension. It's a powerful cry from people who feel that globalization has let distant elites make decisions that hollowed out their local industries, weaken their borders, and threaten their very sense of who they are.
And this all spirals into this really fascinating paradox for leaders today. To effectively deal with truly global problems, I'm talking pandemics, climate change, financial crises, to actually protect their own citizens from these threats, do nations have to give up some of their independent power and agree to work together? It's a real catch-22.
So does all this mean the nation-state is doomed, that it's going the way of the dinosaur? Well, not so fast. The story is a lot more complicated and, frankly, a lot more interesting than that. Sovereignty isn't just disappearing. You could say it's being remixed for the 21st century.
So here's the big takeaway, right? Sovereignty isn't vanishing, it's transforming. It's not a simple black or white you have it or you don't kind of thing anymore. Instead, it's becoming layered. It's something that has to be constantly negotiated, and it's just a whole lot more complex. And to make sense of this new world, experts have come up with a few different models. We've already talked about pooled sovereignty, with the EU being the classic case. Then you have what's called flexible sovereignty. This is where powerful countries kind of pick and choose which international agreements to join based on what they think is best for them. Think of the US moving in and out of the Paris Climate Accord. And finally, there's layered sovereignty. This is where, for a huge issue like climate change, you have authority and rules happening at the city level, the national level, and the global level all at the same time.
So what all this really points to is a new kind of ideal, maybe a new goal for countries today, what some are calling adaptive sovereignty. And this is the ultimate balancing act. It's about staying accountable and legitimate to your own people at home, while at the same time finding smart ways to cooperate with others on the world stage. It's about being both independent and interdependent.
And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. You know, the old way of thinking was that power is something you hoard, right? You protect it inside your borders. But in a world this deeply interconnected, where no single country, no matter how powerful, can solve the biggest challenges alone, is true power actually found in the ability and the willingness to share it? That's really the question at the heart of our global future. Thanks for joining this Explain.